No, I think that's appropriate too. Just,
Okay, we. Okay, opening statement by the prosecutor.
Thank you, Your
Mr.
Honor.
Telgenhof.
Good morning. Everybody came back, so that's always a good start. It's not disappearing. I'm technologically challenged, so I apologize.
It'll just be easier to see.
It's not. Is that not? Before I get started with the talking about the case, one thing that I think Mr. Klingon and I both probably should have mentioned to you yesterday that we were talking about this morning that kind of came up during the jury selection is the idea of these pictures and graphic things. You'll have notice that that's going to happen. We're not going to just splash something on the screen and catch everybody off guard, obviously out of respect for you and out of respect for the other people in the courtroom. So we probably should have mentioned that yesterday when we were talking about that. But anyway, this case is, and you probably surmised this from what we talked about yesterday, but I think the evidence is going to show you that this case is really about two people. It's about the defendant, Mr. Fruge, that is here in the courtroom, and you got a chance to see yesterday, and you're going to get to see videos and different things, recorded interviews, so you're going to get to hear from Mr. Fruge. In that sense, you're going to get to see Mr. Fruge, and he's obviously an important part of this trial. And the other man that's a part of this is this man here on the screen. This is Jacob Conklin, who a lot of his friends and family called him Jake. And this is really a case about these two men. And that's what we're really going to be spending our time talking about over the next 8 days, maybe 7 if you're lucky. And but these two men, you'll hear, were childhood friends. And they weren't, best buddies from age 3 to, 18, anything of that nature. My understanding is, and the evidence will show you, that they really became friends around middle school. And I believe Matt was a grade ahead of Jake in school. Matt was in 8th grade when they became friends. Jake was in 7th grade. One summer in particular, you'll hear they were inseparable. They had a common love of skateboarding, and you'll hear about that, and you'll see that one of the pieces of evidence that you'll get a chance to look at and we'll talk about is text messages between these two in the later years. And you'll see that that was an interest that they had when they were in their 30s, still both interested in skateboarding and talking about how they were going to skate together. Excuse me. So these guys were friends when they were young, and then, like happens to a lot of childhood friendships, they drifted apart over the years. And you'll hear about that it was years and years they didn't have contact. Both were living in the area for most of that time, but just, traveled in different circles and different life experiences, and had just fallen out of contact with each other. And in 2014, 2 years ago, they became reunited, and you'll hear about that and how that came about. And at that time, Jake was living in Michigan, as was Matt, and they kind of just picked up this friendship right where it had left off years and years ago. And after that, Jake and his family moved down to Florida, and you'll see that between text messages and phone calls, they kept in touch every day. And then as it leads up to the incident that took place that brings us all here, you'll see that I'm not exaggerating when I say every day. I mean, these guys didn't miss a day. They talked on the phone. They texted back and forth. They were involved in each other's lives from long distance. And one of the ironies, I guess, coincidences, I never learned the difference between those two words in English class. I probably should have. But one of the things that is striking, I think, and that you'll hear about is despite the fact that they had not been in touch for all these years, these two guys that were friends as kids shared a lot of similarities. Their lives, even though they had gone in different physical directions, their lives were similar in a lot of ways, and you'll hear about that, and it really, I think, has a large impact on what happened here. One of the things that they shared is they both were married. They both had kids. Jake and his wife Jessica had 4 children. Matt, the defendant, and his wife Courtney had 2 children. Both had problems in their marriage, and you'll hear about those. Both had ups and downs like a lot of folks go through in their marriages. And that's something that they shared with each other. Both of them had struggles with substances where they would use alcohol, they would use drugs, to the point where it was a problem, not just socially and we can handle it. The evidence will show you that both of them had problems that were things that they really needed to get help for. And the other thing that they shared, along thinking about the health, is some mental health issues that they both had. And you'll hear about that, how they both sought treatment, they both were prescribed medication for different mental health issues that they had. And especially with respect to the defendant, and we talked a little bit about it in the jury selection, but you'll hear he had many diagnoses over the years. Many different times people tried to treat him and help him, and long before he ever served in the armed forces. And that's something that, not to the same degree, but that Jake also struggled with. And you'll hear that he had ADD and was prescribed Adderall, and that he was prescribed a Klonopin as an adult. And we'll talk about those drugs later this morning. We'll start talking about some of these drugs that are involved in the case. And the last thing that, I'm sure there are many things that they shared. But the last thing that they shared that I think is relevant to this case is something we didn't talk about yesterday, and something that is not an easy thing to talk about, people don't want to talk about, is cross-dressing. Both of these men shared an interest in wearing women's clothing. And I don't tell you that to badmouth Mr. Fruge. I certainly don't tell you that to tarnish Mr. Conklin's memory or anything of that nature. But you'll hear one of the things that, I guess good or bad, with technology nowadays, police officers in our county, they wear body cameras. They videotape everything that goes on, or virtually everything that goes on. And so because of that, we're able to see the defendant for about 5.5 hours after this incident takes place. And I'm not going to sit you through 5.5 hours of video, but we'll watch a lot of that video. And we'll have the witnesses who were there and who interacted with the defendant testify. And what you'll soon learn, only a few minutes into his discussions with the police officers, is the night that this happened, and I'm going to get into that in a minute, what Mr. Fruge wanted to talk about was drugs he wanted to talk about cross-dressing, and he wanted to talk about sex. Those are the things that he chose to talk about the night that his friend was killed. So we need to talk about it. We need to talk about the cross-dressing. We need to make you aware of that that's going to be an issue in this case. Because, again, it's not something that I wanted to be a part of this case, or we had this great idea that we would make it a part of this case. Soon after Mr. Fruge, actually when he's arrested and he's on the ground, immediately after this happened, he tells the officers, I need to get up and go back and tell Courtney, his wife, that I go into her drawer and I wear her panties. That's what he talked about. So that's something, and you'll hear that that's something that these men both struggled with. And it was a struggle, and you'll hear that in the evidence with both of them. That isn't something that they consciously thought, this is a great idea and this is the way I want to live my life. It's something that it's kind of a demon that they wrestled with, same as they wrestled with addiction, and the same that they wrestled with mental health issues. So they shared these things. And soon after they reunited as friends, as I said, Jake and his wife, Jessica, moved down to Florida. And they kept in contact, and you'll hear Jessica later this morning, Jake's wife, and she'll tell you that they had struggles in their marriage, and a lot of it was due to Jake's use of substances, and Jake mental health issues, and Jessica's not a doctor, and we're not going to call her as an expert on what was going on in Jake's head, but she'll tell you about their struggles and how she really wanted him to get help and get treatment. And it came a time that she couldn't deal with it anymore. It was just too much. She's got 4 kids. She's got a husband that is withdrawn. She's got a husband that is struggling with these issues. And she decides that she's going to have to leave. And so she comes up to Michigan, where she grew up, where all these folks grew up. She comes up to Michigan with her kids in September of last year. And so she comes north. I think she meets her mother in Tampa, and they stop off and stay at a relative's on the way and kind of make their way up to Michigan. And Jake was obviously torn up about it, and you'll see some of the text between Jake and the defendant. And Jake didn't deal well with it. And Jake wanted to see his kids. And so he made a plan together with the defendant that he would come up to Michigan, that Jake would leave Florida, pack up his stuff, and come to Michigan and see if he could reunite with his family, if he could prove himself to his wife. And you'll hear that one of the things that he had done was made an appointment to see a therapist up here in Michigan, because he knew that that's what his wife wanted. And you'll see some of the text, how he's frantic. He doesn't know where his kids are. And he's trying to figure out, what are they doing? Where are they going? And Jessica will talk to you about those times and how Jake was, she wanted space. And it'll be obvious when you hear her testify, and it's obvious when you read the text messages. But Jessica just wanted some time to decompress, some time to process. And Jake was frantic. Jake wasn't given that space. And I think at one point Jessica told him, you're not making things better by, bothering me and wanting to talk to the kids all the time. And she would make appointments. You can talk to the kids tomorrow at noon. And, Jake couldn't wait till noon. But they were trying to work through this in their own way. And you'll see Jessica wasn't, you're not going to talk to the kids, and you're unfit, and things of that nature. That wasn't her thought process as this whole thing started. And so they have this plan that Jake's going to come to Michigan, and he's going to stay with the defendant and his wife Courtney and their kids at their home here in Charlevoix County. And so, odd thing that you'll see as you go through this is, there's a lot of odd things, but one is they each think they're helping the other. It's very clear that the defendant thinks Jake has all these problems, and boy, if I can just get him up to Michigan, I'll help him deal with his problems. And Jake felt the same way about the defendant. The defendant has all these problems, and if I can get to Michigan and spend time with him, it'll be good for him. And the reality is, it wasn't going to be good for anybody. These guys have issues that, untreated, with no help, they're not going to help each other get through this. And one of the things I think that's striking that you'll see is one of the early text messages when Jake is on his way to Michigan. The defendant is texting him, and they're talking on the phone, but one of the early on messages is from the defendant asking Jake if he would save some of his Klonopins, his prescription medication, if he would save some to share with the defendant when he got to Michigan. And you'll hear some evidence where the defendant was telling people that, oh, he was going to help Jake sober up, and he was going to get Jake help, and he was going to get him on the straight and narrow, and Jake hadn't even crossed the Florida state line. And the defendant's already talking about, can I use some of your prescription drugs that you need for your mental health condition? Can you save me some so that I can use them to get high? That's the thought process. So Jake gets to Michigan on a Wednesday, September 30th of last year. And Courtney will talk to you about that day. Jake gets there, they eat dinner. Jake doesn't eat anything, but she said it starts off kind of normal. That'll be the evidence. And the defendant and Jake decide they're going to try to deal with some of Jake's legal issues because Jake's not seeing his kids. He wants to see his kids and so on. So they deal with that a bit. The other thing that's kind of different that happens that day, September 30th of last year, is that's the day that the defendant decides that he's going to tell his wife Courtney that he's a cross-dresser and that he has struggled with this since he was, says at different times in different places in the evidence, but I think what he tells her is about the age of 12. He's had this issue that he's been dealing with. And the day that Jake comes up from Florida and arrives at his home, that's the day that he chooses to tell his wife about this. And you'll hear that the defendant has seen a lot of treaters over the years. He's seen counselors. He had never told anyone. And his statement to someone else was, and that you'll hear, this is the first time as an adult he'd ever told anyone about this issue. And he chooses that day, September 30th, the day that Jake gets to his home. And so Courtney has her kids to deal with and gets the kids off to bed, and September 30th for her, like I said, starts off kind of normal. Gets a little curveball, big curveball with this revelation about her husband. But she puts the kids to bed and she goes to bed. And she'll tell you that these two guys, the defendant and Jake, didn't go to bed that night. And you'll hear from the interviews and the statements, the defendant says that as well. They stayed up all night. And part of that, I guess, maybe we can understand, right? These guys are good friends, good buddies. They haven't seen each other in person for quite a while. And so they're excited to talk to each other and stay up all night, right? Well, the other thing that caused him to stay up all night, and this is what the defendant has told evaluators, counselors, the police. He had prescription Ritalin that he shared with Jake, and they took Ritalin all night long. And you'll hear that the defendant was prescribed Ritalin, and the prescription initially was for 2 pills a day. You take 1 pill in the morning and 1 with another meal. And the doctor told him, and you'll hear from Dr. Wansky, that if you don't think that's helping you with your focus, because it was designed to help him with his ADHD, if you don't think it's helping you enough with your focus, then you can take it 3 times a day. In no scenario would it be prescribed to take it every 2 hours so that you could stay up all night long, and to share it with your friend, to basically trade prescriptions so that you guys could be high. No other way to put it. And Courtney will talk to you about that night and how she was trying to sleep in her bedroom, and the defendant was constantly in and out, was hyper, manic, in and out of her room. And he's saying things to her like, "You're not going to leave me, are you? You're never going to leave me, are you? You won't leave me, will you?" And this was the day that he had talked to her about this cross-dressing issue. And you'll hear they had struggles in their marriage before this. And that's what he's focused on. "You're not going to leave me. Not going to leave me." And finally, at some point, and Courtney will tell you that from time to time she would go and try to figure out what the heck are these guys doing. And a lot of times they were out in the garage, and you'll see pictures of the garage. And the idea was that Jake was going to sleep in the garage. They were going to kind of create a space for Jake so that while he stayed with the Fruges, that he would be in the garage. So what Courtney thought they were going to be doing is maybe building this, I think the defendant described it as a hut in the garage for Jake to stay in. But you'll see that not a whole lot of progress was made when they worked all night long. And finally, at one point during the night, the defendant came in to Courtney and had his bottle of prescription Ritalin, and we'll go through the pill count and how many pills these guys took, and you'll hear all that evidence. But he came into the bedroom and said to Courtney, and this is early morning hours, "Please take these. Please take these and hide these. I don't want to take any more." And Courtney did that. And she'll tell you she didn't know the exact number, maybe 3 or 4 pills left in this pill bottle. And she hid that pill bottle. And the next morning at, I think it was 8:30 in the morning, Courtney gets up, and she's, again, these women, as you hear these women testify, what they went through dealing with the defendant and dealing with Jake and his struggles. To me, it's amazing. Courtney gets up, and she's getting kids off to school, and she's having car problems, so she's got to go to Brown Motors and get her car worked on, and it's just another day for her. These guys are up all night getting high, but she's got to go get her car fixed. And you'll see that about 8:30 in the morning, the defendant texts her, 8:30 in the morning. He texts her and says, "Where's those pills? Where's those pills?" It didn't last very long, right? Told her, "Hide these from me. I don't want to do these anymore." 8:30 in the morning, he's texting her, asking where those pills are. And they have some text discussion about that, "Are you sure?" And the defendant says, "I don't want to be that kind of person anymore, but let's get them out of the way. Just tell me where they're at." And Courtney said, "They're under my pillow. You can get those pills." So that's the start of October 1st, which is the last day of Jake Conklin's life. That's how it starts, is the defendant asking for these pills. So you'll hear that, again, for Courtney, it starts out as a normal day, other than that. And she gets her car fixed, she comes back home, and she had sold a bracelet on Facebook. Who knew that you can, my wife was selling things on Facebook. Who knew that you can do this? Well, she had sold a bracelet, and she had to meet the person that was buying the bracelet from her in Boyne Falls. These guys live off the Boyne City Road in Boyne City. And Courtney will tell you that the defendant and Jake decided they were going to come along with her. And I don't know that she was real thrilled with that, but everybody wanted to go on this car trip. And so the two of them went, and the defendant's son, Levi, went as well. And so the four of them drive to Boyne Falls, to the gas station, and meet this person, and come back. When they get back home, Jake decides that he's going to go get his computer and bring it in. And you'll hear that Jake basically packed everything that he owned to come up here. And you'll see some pictures of what the garage looked like and how things are scattered. And you'll hear Jessica tell you about what was in the van. And you'll hear Jake's mom, Martha Murner, talk to you about, she helped him pack, and he basically just packed all his possessions. He didn't know if he's ever coming back to Florida. He was ready to come to Michigan. And so he brings the computer in, and he and the defendant get on the computer, and all they're talking about in the afternoon is this thing called borderline personality disorder. And that Courtney will talk to you about that. She was there for those conversations, and she'll tell you that Jake was basically diagnosing the two of them. That Jake was saying, this is what we have. This is what I have. This is why I have this appointment with this counselor. And Matt, that's what you have too. And that's why we cross-dress. That's why, we do the things that we do. And Courtney will tell you that it got to the point where the defendant was so upset that he was just crying hard. Courtney said, "Stop it, you're crying like a baby." And Jake said, no, you don't treat people like that have this. And Courtney was kind of put off, like, you're a guest in my house and you're telling me how to talk to my own husband. But that was the afternoon conversation. It's about cross-dressing. It's about getting online, trying to figure out, why do we do this? Why do we do this? And Courtney she'll tell you, she's disturbed by it. I guess who wouldn't be, right? And that she felt like the defendant was getting more and more worked up with everything. But as the day went on, the kids had soccer. Life goes on, right? Life goes on. Kids had soccer. Courtney's got to get the kids off to soccer. And so she's getting ready to leave, and at that point, Jake is asleep on the couch in the house. Jake's sleeping. Courtney talks to the defendant about, do you want to go to soccer? And he's not sure, and he makes the decision that he's going to stay home, and he tells her that he's going to get some sleep too. Obviously, they had a tough night. So Courtney leaves with the kids. And obviously, we've got two people there in that meantime, so we get a little bit of a gap in what the evidence is going to be able to show you. Obviously, Jake can't tell us what happened, but we do have statements from the defendant. And what he tells officers is that Jake was asleep on the couch, and he was frustrated. He was very frustrated because how come he can sleep? We're both taking this Ritalin, we're both doing these drugs together, and yet he can go to sleep. I can't sleep. Those are his words. He needs something to, the words that he uses, bring him down. He needs to come down. Okay? What's he coming down from? A high. That's what we come down from. He needs something to bring him down. So at some point, he rouses Jake apparently and says, "Hey Jake, are you holding out on me? Are you bogarting I never heard this expression. I'm probably not even saying it right. Are you bogarting drugs on me? How are you able to sleep? Are you hiding the high-grade good shit heroin from me? And Jake's like, no. No, but you know what I take sometimes to come down is I take some NyQuil. I take some NyQuil. And so the defendant drinks NyQuil. Not because he got a cold or, stuffed up sinuses or something. He takes it to use it as a drug, right? He's high. He wants to come down. And when he does that, what the defendant tells police later, what he tells counselors later, is that his mind begins to start racing. He's already having a little bit of that with this frustration, with this, how come he can sleep, I can't sleep. But now he's really going. Now he's really going. And he's pacing around, and he talks about that, and he's looking for a gun, and he's thinking about, does Jake have guns? And this is the kind of stuff that's going through his mind. Jake's asleep on the couch, okay? Jake's asleep on the couch, and the evidence will show. He's thinking, where's the guns? Where's the guns? Where's my gun? Where's his gun? Okay? Courtney comes home with the kids. What a thing to come home to, right? Courtney comes home with the kids and comes in the door, and the defendant comes running up and throws his arms around the kids, and I love you, I love you, I love you. And Courtney said, that wasn't the usual greeting from the defendant. He's a good dad, and don't get me wrong. She'll tell you, he was a good dad, great dad. That's not how he greeted the kids when they came home from soccer. And so Courtney kind of sticks by the defendant's side. She's going to get the kid. Now it's like 7 o'clock at night, almost 7, and she wants to get the kids, get their pajamas on and kind of get them, not ready to go to bed quite yet, but get them in the mode to go to bed. And so she says to Matt, let's go upstairs with me and let's help me get the kids ready for bed. And Matt's hyped up. And she, on the stairs, on the way upstairs, she turns to him and she says, what have you been doing? And he says, I took Ritalin. She said, okay. So they go upstairs, and Courtney first is helping one of the boys get ready. She's assuming that the defendant is in the other room helping the other son. She goes into that room and she's frustrated because he hadn't done anything. He hadn't helped with anything. So she then goes and gets the other son ready. And while she's dealing with him, Matt goes in to talk to the other boy. And I apologize, I can't remember which one was which at that point. Levi and Malachi are their boys' names. And Courtney hears him telling the son, Daddy has a drug and alcohol problem. Daddy has a drug and alcohol problem. This is what he's telling their son, little boy. And Courtney comes in and says, what the heck are you doing? Kids talk. You want him to go to school and tell people Daddy's got a drug and alcohol problem? But that's his mindset at this point, right? So Courtney goes downstairs, and at this point, Jake's awake. And I think Courtney says she talked to him in the garage. So she says to Jake, what the heck has been going on while I've been gone? What is going on around here? And Jake says, I don't know, I've been sleeping. I just woke up. And so Courtney goes back into the house. Excuse me. And now we've got a couple of people, these two men that I talked to you about, this case is about. They've got different things on their mind at that point. You see, the defendant calls a friend of his named Mike Deering, and you're going to hear from Mike, hopefully you'll hear from later today. He calls Mike Deering, and he starts telling Mike that, I've seen the light. I've seen the light. I've had a religious epiphany. And you'll hear that the defendant's not a religious person. He's not a person that by nature would be talking like that. He calls Mike and tells him this. And Mike talks to him for, I think the phone record shows, about an 11-minute phone call. And Mike is so concerned about his behavior that he calls Matt's dad. He calls Mark Fruge, and he tells him how to turn the TV on. He tells Mark Fruge, and he just gets his voicemail. And he says, I just had this phone call with Matt, and something's wrong. Something's wrong. I don't really want him to know that I called you, but if there's any way that someone closer than me can go and check on him, that'd be a good idea. Mike Deering will tell you that he's been friends with the defendant for quite a while, and that his clear impression from that phone call is that the defendant was on something. He's on some drugs. The way he's talking, the way he's acting. So the defendant makes that phone call. So what is Jake doing? Jake texts a friend of his named Randy Davis, a woman named Randy. He texts her, and he had texted her previously and told her that things were weird at the Fruge house and that he may want to go and stay at her house if that was possible. And she's got kids and her house was messy and she wanted to get her dishes done, and so she said, yeah, you can come and stay later, but don't come now. But right about this same time, about 7 o'clock on October 1st, he texts Randy Davis and he says that his friend's PTSD is getting bad. That's what he relates this to, is his friend's PTSD. And he wants to know, can he come now? So what happens next? So Jake is looking around the house. He's walking around. He says to Courtney, do you know where my keys are? You know where my keys are to the van? Courtney, I don't know. Courtney's got a lot going on, right? She's got her kids to deal with. She's got the defendant saying that he's on Ritalin, and he's calling his buddy saying that he's seen the light and had a religious epiphany, and she's dealing with all that. And she'll tell you that I don't think she's real proud of it, but that was the last thing on her mind, was helping Jake Conklin, find his van keys. And so Jake is looking around for his van keys. Courtney talks to the defendant, and what's the defendant looking for? A gun. So you'll hear that the defendant has a shotgun that he kept loaded in his house, and that Courtney was afraid of how the defendant was acting, and she hid the gun. She hid the gun on him. Okay? And so he's looking for this gun. Where's my gun? Where's my gun? I don't know where your gun is. Didn't want to tell him where the gun was, especially the way he was acting, right? So we've got the defendant looking for a gun. We've got Jake looking for his van keys. Wanted to get the heck out of here. Had texted his friend saying, it's getting bad. All right? So Jake goes outside. His van's outside. And we'll never know what his thought process was. Maybe he's thinking I left the keys in the van. Who knows? He's outside in the driveway. And Courtney is in the house with the defendant. And the defendant's looking for this gun, and all of a sudden the defendant switches gears and he goes to a knife block that is sitting on their kitchen counter, and he grabs a knife. Big knife. You're going to see that here later in the case. And he grabs that knife and he heads toward the garage. He's in the kitchen and he heads toward the garage. And Courtney is following him. And I think the defendant says that he heard her say no, I think she says that maybe she doesn't remember exactly when she yelled or what she yelled. By the time she gets outside, the defendant is on top of Jake Conklin, and there's blood everywhere. And Courtney pushes the defendant off of Jake, and she can see that he's been stabbed many, many times in his neck. And you'll hear that Dr. David Start is the doctor down in Grand Rapids that did the autopsy, and he'll tell you about the injuries that Jake suffered and just the brutal, brutal killing that this man suffered. And there's blood everywhere, and unfortunately you'll see those pictures, and a couple of those pictures. You can see his neck gaped open. He was stabbed in the skull so far that the knife entered the dura in his brain. Dr. Start will tell you that one of the stab wounds, the other ones, went 8 inches into Jake. And it happened in a matter of seconds. By the time Courtney got out there, it was done. It was done. And you'll see that he was also stabbed in the torso, and that he was down on the ground. And you'll see there's leaves in the area, and you'll see the leaves are just covered with blood. It's a bloodbath. There's no other way to describe it. So what does the defendant do? Courtney calls 911. Well, jump ahead here. He throws the knife. That's what Courtney tells the 911 operator. And you'll see the pictures. The knife's laying down on the ground in the blood. And the defendant goes across the street to his neighbor's house. And you'll hear Gerald Cluck is one of the neighbors. And he'll tell you about how he's wild-eyed and out of control and just covered in blood. That the blood was dripping so much off of his elbow that as he was leaning into their car, blood was coming into their car. They rolled down the window to talk to the defendant. They've known him. He was their neighbor. And they didn't know what the deal was, and they didn't see the blood, obviously, initially. And he wants them to give him a ride. He wants to get out of there. He wants a ride from them. And they, no thanks. And they roll up the window, lock the doors, and get out of there. And he's telling them about this religious experience, this epiphany that he's gone through. And they get the heck out of there. And in the meantime, Courtney she goes in the house. I mean, she's got kids to worry about, right? You got kids. His 2 young sons are in that house when he butchers Jake Conklin. And Courtney doesn't know, obviously, at this point, what the defendant's capable of, and she'll talk to you about that. So she goes in the house and she locks the doors, and she calls 911, and you'll hear that call. And it's tough to listen to. I mean, these pictures are tough to look at, obviously, but this call from this poor woman who's just seen what this man did to his friend, she calls 911 and she says, "I think my husband just killed someone." And they're asking her about it, and she says, "He's high." And she says, "He's so fucking high." That's what she tells the 911 operator, the woman who knows him better than anyone. Saw him that night. And what does she tell 911? She tells him he's high. Not he had a PTSD episode. He flashed back to Iraq. He's high. And you'll hear the dispatchers then call and let the officers know, because they got it, right? We got officers coming to the scene now, and their lives are at risk, right? We got a killer who's on drugs. So you'll hear that now officers are coming. Courtney's in the house, and Courtney can see out the window some of the things that the defendant's doing. So he tries to get away in the neighbor's car, and he tries to get away in his own truck. And you'll see that when the police get there, the truck door is open, and inside there's blood everywhere. The defendant went in there, and Courtney will tell you that the keys weren't in the truck, so he wasn't able to leave, okay? So the police come, and you watch these videos, and I tell you what, you see on the paper or news people criticizing police officers, and they do this wrong, and they do that wrong, and I think what the evidence is going to show you is, man, this was some bravery and some brains on the part of these officers. They get to the scene. They're driving as fast as they can, right? You'll see Corporal Church is on a call. Somebody got a deer blind stolen. That's our usual Northern Michigan crime, right? Someone's got an issue with their deer blind, and Corporal Church is talking to them. And in the middle of that, he gets this 911 call that this dispatcher telling him someone has been stabbed in Boyne City, off the Boyne City Road. And so Corporal Church gets in his car and he takes off. And you'll see all these officers, I said, not all, we're not going to show you 4 videos showing you the same thing, but their body cams are on and you'll see this whole thing. And they get to the scene, and first they run into the Clucks, right? Because the Clucks had blood on their car. They'd just gone through this. These poor people were just on their way to Walmart. I think we're going to go shopping on a Thursday night, and the officers run into them at the corner as they're leaving, and they tell them, what they saw. And you'll see the officers are kind of staging there. I don't know, officers, maybe I shouldn't use, maybe it's not the right wording, but basically, this is a crime scene, and we don't know where this person is going to go. We don't know if he's got other weapons. We don't know what the deal is here. All we know is his wife is saying that he killed somebody, he stabbed somebody, and that he's high. Not going to be rational when we deal with them. So the officers start start driving toward the house, and then they see him. It's standing in the middle of the road. And you'll hear from the officers that were at the scene there. And they see Mr. Fruge in the middle of the road, and you'll watch the video. It's hard to make him out initially on the road. He's down quite a ways from where they are. They get out of their car, and they've got their rifles, right? I mean, these guys just killed somebody. They don't know what they're dealing with, and the wife says he's high. So they come walking, 3 in a line, and they're walking toward Mr. Fruge, and they're saying, "Get your hands up, turn around and walk toward us." And Mr. Fruge, he's able to do that, puts his hands up, turns around, he's walking backward toward them, and you'll see it's a good distance that he's got to come backward. At that point, Mr. Fruge starts running backward. I'm not the fastest guy in the world. He runs backward twice as fast as I can run forward. He's coming toward these officers on a dead run backward. He's a military guy, right? Good shape. He's coming toward them. These officers have rifles drawn, right? This guy's just killed somebody. They don't know what they're dealing with. And Deputy Kaminsky, you'll see, is a real hero in this thing, in my opinion. Deputy Kaminsky puts his gun aside, actually holds it in one hand, and reaches for his taser with the other hand. And as he's on a dead run, Deputy Kaminsky tases him. And so does Officer McGuire from the Boyne City Police Department. And he goes down. He goes down. I don't know if you've ever seen someone tase before, but you get him right, it's pretty effective. He goes down. And you'll see in the video, as I said to you earlier, one of the first words that come out of Mr. Fruge's mouth is, "I got to get back and tell Courtney that I steal her panties out of her panty drawer." No talk about, "Boy, I thought I was back in Iraq and I killed my buddy because I thought he was Taliban. I thought he was killing my kids." What he wants to talk about is cross-dressing. He wants to talk about the drugs that he's on, and that's what he talks to these officers about. So he's taken into custody, and he's compliant. And you'll hear in the closing, and you'll hear through the experts, why that's really important when we're talking about insanity. Okay, we got somebody who's out of their mind, can't control themselves, but when the officers say, "Turn over," he can turn over. When they say, "Put your hands behind your back," puts his hands behind his back. He's compliant. He can do these things. Now you'll see he's revved up. He's revved up. He's talking a mile a minute, and Deputy Kaminsky's like leaning on him and, "Come on, buddy. Come on, buddy. It's okay. Take a breath. Take a breath." And then when Deputy Kaminsky pulls back, he'll get revved up again. He's hyper. He's worked up. He's high. His own words. He had to come down. He's high. So we take him into custody, and Deputy Kilishevsky is the officer, and Deputy Gauthier transport him to the jail. And that's all on video. He's riding in the car with them to the jail, and he's talking a mile a minute, and you'll hear it. And again, not PTSD, not Iraq, not I thought this guy was going to kill my kids. Cross-dressing, sex, drugs. That's all he's talking about. That's all he's talking about. And Deputy Kilishevsky will tell you that, you know, he spent a decent amount of time with the defendant that night, and he's been a police officer for a while. And he'll tell you that I thought he was high, thought he was on something. and probably even more important in that respect is it's not just that he's going to come in and say that at trial because, you know, that's our theory of the case, so the deputy is going to say that here at trial. You'll see him say it on video. Because what he does is he takes the defendant to the jail, and you'll see kind of the handoff, right? We're going to learn a lot about police work and what these guys do. And Deputy Kilishevsky gets him to the jail, and he's walking him, or actually the defendant's still in the car, and he's talking to the jailers at that point. And they ask him, how is he, right? They're going to have, now it's my problem, right? This guy just, what was he like on the ride over? You know, I got it. What am I dealing with? And you'll hear Deputy Kilishevsky says, he's on something. He's on something. You'll hear all the officers at the scene, Deputy Kaminsky, Corporal Church, everyone who interacted with this man on that night is going to tell you, based on their experience, based on what they see, he was on something. There's no question in any of their minds, okay? So he gets to the jail, and again, like I said, there's about 5.5 hours of video because the people at the jail are wearing body cams. And again, and if I'm wrong, I'm sure Mr. Clayton will point it out, but in this 5.5 hours, you're not going to hear any talk about PTSD. Okay, and you're going to hear experts talk about what PTSD is, and I know some of you have experience with it and experience in your families with it. And you'll hear about, I'll tell you an incident that you'll hear about that the defendant dealt with, is he went to a Boyne City football game, and that can be traumatic for a Charlevoix person, but he went to a Boyne City football game, and I don't know if you've ever been to a Boyne City football game, but when the Ramblers score, what do? They fire off a cannon, okay? And you'll hear that was really tough for the defendant. And that's common with PTSD, you know, and I think we made a big deal this year, finally, in our state, and I think across the country with 4th of July, with fireworks. You know, that's a difficult time for people with PTSD. And so there were some towns that said, we're not, out of respect for the veterans, we're not going to have a fireworks display because this is, you know, for the fun that we get of watching this. It takes them back to when they were overseas. Okay? So those are the kind of things that Mr. Fruge has had problems dealing with. And you'll see the text messages, and Courtney will tell you about it, that he didn't want to go to that game. He knew what was going to happen. He knew what it was going to be like. And that it does take him back. And it does bring back a lot of bad memories. And to his credit, he tried to go for his kids. He wanted to go to the game, but he had to leave, I think, before halftime because of that. And that's the kind of thing that you'll hear the doctors talk about, and I think both doctors, you'll hear one that's testifying for the prosecution, one that's testifying for the defense. They'll tell you that's the kind of thing that people with PTSD deal with. They deal with nightmares. Mr. Fruge dealt with nightmares. He would, when he went to sleep at night, he would dream about things that happened over in Iraq. And that's not uncommon. And he'd wake up and he'd be confused about, did that really happen or was that a dream? Okay? What you'll also hear is the things that happened on October 1st, 2015 are nothing like any of that. None of that. You're not going to hear anything that Jake Conklin fired off a cannon or shot a gun or did something that somehow triggered the defendant to think, I'm back in Iraq and I've got to eliminate this threat. You're just not going to hear it. Not going to hear it. We could guess. But the judge is going to tell you, we're going to ask you to base your decision on evidence. And the evidence is going to show you there's nothing. The defendant is asked about that. Did anything happen? Was there a fight between you guys? No, nothing. So you're going to see a lot of video. You'll see a lot of video of him. So you're going to know, and the judge already gave you the instruction, but you'll hear it, actually I think you'll hear it twice more. You'll hear it before the experts testify about insanity, and you'll hear it at the end of the case. And what that instruction says is, what you've got to decide is whether or not he was legally insane at the time of this incident. But in doing so, you can look at his behavior before the incident, and you can look at his behavior after the incident. Okay? And that's why I think this 5.5 hours of video is so critical, because this is our best guess at what, we don't have video of him killing Jake Conklin. Thank God we don't. We don't have video of that, but we have video right after. We've got an interview that Lieutenant Harris conducted with the defendant. It's about an hour long. It's about an hour long. And you'll hear that it's the lieutenant that brings up the defendant's military background. And it seems like that if this is a PTSD incident, it'd be a good time to say, yeah, I was over there and it was terrible. And he quickly pivots in answering that question to talking about how he struggled with cross-dressing his whole life. Okay? So what was really at work that night? And that's what you're ultimately going to have to decide. What I will tell you is that the evidence is going to show you this isn't a whodunit. Okay? We know who did it. And you'll see him on tape telling Lieutenant Harris, he did it. He did it. He killed his friend. And you'll hear him give different reasons for that, which I would say to you, that's not uncommon. He's going to give different reasons for that. One of the reasons that he's going to give you, that he gave Lieutenant Harris, is he did this to save his marriage. He did this, he killed Jake Conklin to save his marriage. I'll talk to you more at the end of the case about how maybe that all fits together with what was going on in his life and what was going on in Jake Conklin's life. He also talks to Lieutenant Harris about, Jake wanted me to make a decision about how I was going to live my life. And then he kills his friend to save his marriage. What he never tells Lieutenant Harris, what he never tells the jailers, and you'll see, these aren't like interrogations. These aren't interrogations. Lieutenant Harris will ask him one question, and the defendant is still hyped up, and he'll talk and talk and talk and talk. I don't know why I'm doing this, because I'm reading transcripts of it. But you'll see one line, and then he'll talk and talk and talk. And you'll see in these jail videos, Scott Miller is the person who's there with him. Scott most times is not saying anything. Scott's just in the room with the defendant trying to calm him down, and he's going on and on and on about who he wants to put his penis in, and that, you know, he wants to fuck like a man. Not PTSD. This is not a PTSD case. And again, you've been instructed, you'll be instructed over and over again about this insanity defense. And I think at the end of the day, as I said, it's not a whodunit. I don't think there's any question, and I don't say this often in an opening, there's no question that we'll be able to prove to you that he killed Jake Conklin beyond any doubt. Beyond any doubt, he killed Jake Conklin. So you've got a couple issues that you're going to have to grapple with at the end of the case. And I kind of tell you all this to give you a little bit of a preview, so when you're looking at the evidence and you're hearing this, to try to put that into some sort of context. But I think there's two things really And one has some, as everything does, some subparts, because we're lawyers, so it has to be that way. But the first is the degree of murder. And the judge talked to you a little bit about, and I'll talk to you way more about it in closing, but you're going to need to decide, okay, he killed him. And before we get to the insanity defense, judge told you kind of the order that you do it. Is he guilty of a crime first? Right? Is he guilty of a crime first? And the first crime that you consider is first-degree murder. And then the next crime, if you can't all agree first-degree murder, then you move to second-degree murder. And you can go back and anyway, so you're going to have to decide the degree. First-degree murder, second-degree murder, voluntary manslaughter. Okay? That's the first thing that is going to be an issue in this case. And assuming that you find one of those, then you're going to move on to the insanity defense. And they've got to prove to you that this killing happened because of PTSD. Pure and simple. That's their defense. They're saying it's a PTSD defense. He was suffering from PTSD. That's not enough. Remember the judge talked about mentally ill is not enough. It's got to be because of the PTSD. And that's why I think all this cocktail, mixing of drugs, mixing of things on his mind is so important. That's why I think I'm convinced that at the end of the case, when you hear all the evidence, they're not going to meet that burden. They're not going to meet that burden. And as such, at the end of the case, I'm going to ask you to return a verdict of guilty, and I'm going to ask you to return a verdict of guilty of first-degree murder. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Telgenhof. Mr. Clayton, are you going to give an opening statement at this time, or are you going to wait?
I'm going to give it at this time.
I'm going to take a 10-minute recess. We'll come back and hear your opening statement.
All right.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, take a 10-minute break.
All rise.
You were there. I wasn't there. Weren't you there? Oh, that was